What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're continuing our series on getting started with SketchUp free by modeling a house. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, and so in this video, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you kind of an example that you could follow along with. And so in order to do that, we're gonna model a house in SketchUp. And so I'll try to repeat the keyboard shortcuts as we go, and I'll link to my free keyboard shortcuts guide in the notes down below as well. But the first thing we need to do is we need to start by creating the profile of our building. And so in this case, our building is going to have a length of 20 feet wide by 30 feet long. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to activate the line tool, not by coming over here and clicking on this icon, but instead, notice how if we mouse over this, it shows us an L in parentheses. That indicates that you can tap that keyboard shortcut in order to activate the line tool. So I just tap the L key right here. Well, now I'm going to single click and I'm going to move my mouse in the green direction. Well, remember, and again, we're not clicking and dragging, we're single clicking on a point and then moving our mouse in this direction. Now what we want to do is we want to type in the value of our length. So in this case, our length is going to be 30 feet. We're going to hit the enter key. Now, notice how you don't have to click inside of this box in order to type in the measurements. In fact, you never click inside of this box. What you do is you just tap the L key, single click and move your mouse, and then you type in 20 feet with your mouse wherever it is on the screen. You hit the enter key. And remember that we're using this inference locking in here in order to, or this inferencing, in order to make sure that we're drawing on a flat plane. So remember that now with this line tool active, so L key, click on this line right here. If you move your mouse in the green direction and hold the shift key, you can lock your inference to this direction. So I'm holding shift and I'm just going to move my mouse over here like this. Then I'll draw one more line right here. And if you've done this properly, this is going to fill in a face on your object right here that you can then extrude. Now, we can talk in the future about creating walls with thickness. For this simple house, we're not going to worry too much about that right now. But the next thing we need to do is we need to take this footprint that we've drawn and we need to extrude it to 3D. So what I want to do is I want to activate the push-pull tool. The push-pull tool is this one right here, and it extrudes an object to 3D. Well, in this case, I want to tap the P key with this face selected. So click on the face, tap the P key, and then mouse over this face and single click. Again, remember to single click, don't click and drag. And we're going to type in a value of, we'll call it 11 feet, and hit the enter key. But what that's done is that's extruded this up 11 feet. If you were to take the tape measure tool right here and measure, you can see how this is 11 feet tall. Well, now we need to model our roof. And there's a number of different ways to do this, but say you wanted to be fairly precise about the roof that you create, well, what you can do is you can use a tool called the protractor tool. And what I want to do to activate the protractor tool is I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to click on the 3 dots. When I click on the 3 dots, notice how I get a number of additional tools that are going to pop up. And in this case, we want the protractor. Notice how there's no letter next to the protractor. What that means is this doesn't have a keyboard shortcut. So we need to come into this toolbar and activate the tool right here. And notice how with this tool, as I mouse over different faces, this is going to change the direction. Sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. So what I like to do is activate the tool and then tap the left arrow key on my keyboard. And what that does is that locks the protractor to the green axis right here. Well, now I can single click on a corner point in order to set my middle point. Then you want to set a base direction and you want to rotate your mouse up in order to set your roof direction. And in this case, we're going to say our roof is going to have an angle of 35 degrees. So I'm just going to type in a value of 35 and hit the enter key. And then we'll do the same thing. Protractor, left arrow key, mouse over this point, single click, move your mouse up, type in 35 degrees. And so what that's done, and by the way, when I'm deactivating tools, what I'm doing is I'm just tapping the space key, and the space key just activates the select tool, and it also deactivates whatever tool I currently have active. But now I just want to tap the L key in order to activate the line tool, mouse over this corner, and single click, in order to draw a face in here. Well, now we're ready to extrude this back. So I'm going to tap the P key in order to activate the push-pull tool. And if you ever want to delete out guides inside of the space in SketchUp Free, you can go over to Display and click on the option for Delete All Guides, and those will go away. And then you can just click on the little icon right here in order to minimize this toolbar on the right-hand side. But now I want to tap the P key, mouse over this face, and single click, and move my mouse to the back right here. And notice how I can move my mouse to anywhere on this line, and it's going to inference to that line. So SketchUp is going to pick up that we want to extrude this to the length of this line to whatever point that we click on right here. Now, what we can do is notice how if you click and hold your middle mouse button and orbit around, we've got lines on both of these faces. Well, we can go ahead and tap the E key on our keyboard to activate the eraser, and you can just single click and drag over that line. And notice how because there were two coplanar faces on either side of that line, SketchUp will just merge those together. So you can do the same thing on the back side. Tap E, single click, and drag like this. So now we've got the baseline of our house. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to add a roof. So to add the roof, all I have to do is just single click and then do a shift click on this edge in order to select both edges. And we're going to use a tool called the offset tool. What the offset tool does is it takes edges and offsets them in a direction. So I'm going to tap the F key. That's going to activate the offset tool. And you can find the offset tool. It's going to look something like this. You might have to click on the little three dots in order to find it. But notice how the keyboard shortcut for that is F. So what I can do is I can tap the F key, single click, and I can move my mouse in order to set a depth. And in this case, I'm going to type in a value of 6 and hit the enter key. So this is giving us our roof profile right here. And so what I want is I want my roof to overhang a little bit on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line down, and I'm going to type in a value of 12 inches and hit the enter key right here. Now, you can either draw another line down, also 12 inches right here, or you could just select this edge, tap the M key in order to activate the move tool, and then we can single click on this corner. Well, notice how when we single click on this corner, it moves our faces around unless we tap the control key. When you tap the control key, notice what that does is that puts you in copy mode right here. So we could create a copy of this edge. So there's really two different ways that you could do that. Then we'll just draw a line here. Now, the other thing you can do is you could come over here and draw this again. Totally valid way of doing that. However, the way that I like to do this is by using a cool tool SketchUp has called the flip tool. What the flip tool does is it flips an object in a direction. And so to activate it, you need to click on the three dots right here, and we're going to go find the tool for flip. Notice how it also doesn't have a keyboard shortcut associated with it. Well, if I activate that flip tool, notice how it gives me these three axes in here. Well, what I can do is I can click and drag this axis right here, and it'll flip the object. Now, that's a problem with the way that we did it right now because all it did is move this to the other side. But if you click and drag and tap the control key, notice how that puts you in copy mode. And then I can flip this on the other side right here. Now, one thing you need to do is you need to trace over one of these edges in order to get SketchUp to fill in the face right here. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk about a concept which is called grouping. Because what I want is I want my roof to be grouped separately from my house. And so basically what this means is say that you have a rectangle right here, and say that you have another rectangle right here, like this, right? So if I was to come in here and try to select these edges like this and move this around, notice what it's going to do is it's going to drag that other geometry with it because that geometry is sticky, meaning that the edges and faces have all kind of merged together. Now that can be a little bit problematic, and that's why we want to understand a concept known as grouping. What grouping does is it allows us to select an object, right click on it, and make it a group. Well, then when you make it a group, now if I draw this rectangle right here and then select it, notice how I can move it away without that geometry merging. So this allows us to keep our model organized and allows us to change things in our model without them all merging together. So in this case, I would also group this object. Well, notice how now with these objects, these are both separate objects, and I can edit them independently. And so in this case, what I would do is before I extrude this to 3D, I would double click in order to select the face and all the connected edges right here. And then I would just right click. Now this is in a group, but what you're going to notice is if you try to activate the push-pull tool, so if you tap the P key and try to mouse over this face, notice how you can't do it. You can only do that on raw faces, meaning we need to double click into this group, then activate the push-pull tool like this. So notice how we're getting this kind of like faded out version of the rest of the model, and we've got this kind of bounding box in here. This is just the visual indicator that we are editing geometry that's inside of a group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push-pull this face forward 12 inches on the front side, and I'm going to push-pull this face 12 inches on the back side. And by the way, notice that if you tap the P key and then double click on this face, it'll remember how far the last extrusion you did with the push-pull tool was, and it'll extrude by whatever that distance was. So if you ever need to repeat extrusions, you can just double click in order to repeat what you did the last time. But then I'm just going to activate the eraser tool by tapping the E key on my keyboard. I'm going to click and drag across this edge. Whoops, and across this edge. And by the way, if you ever accidentally erase out a face like that, just do a Control Z in order to undo it. But I'm just going to erase out this extra geometry right here, like this. So now I have a house and I have a roof. So now let's go in here and let's add a door. And so the first thing I want to do before I start adding doors is I want to go ahead and I want to take this geometry and put it in a group as well. So I want my roof in a group and I want my house in a group. So for the house, I'm going to triple click. When I triple click, notice what that's going to do is that's going to select all the connected geometry to whatever face I triple clicked on. So if it's touching this group in any way, or if it's touching this geometry in any way, it's going to select it. But then I'm just going to right click and I'm going to make a group right here. Well, now I want to double click into this group and I want to cut the openings for my door and my window. And so one great way to do this is to use guides. And so the tape measure tool, which you can activate by tapping the T key on your keyboard, not only allows you to measure, but notice how there's an option down here for Control equals toggle create guides. So if I tap the Control key right here, what it's going to do is it's going to take my tape measure and it's going to put it in create guide mode. Well, notice how if I mouse over an edge and single click, then move my mouse in a direction, it's going to allow me to create a guide. And so in this case, I'm going to say that I want a guide 3 feet off of this edge. And by the way, don't do this off of a corner, because if you try to do it off of a corner, notice how it doesn't create this like long guide. You need to do it off of an edge. But what I can do now is I can just single click, type in 3 feet, and hit the enter key in order to create a guide in this direction. I'm also going to move my mouse up and I'm going to type in a value of 7 feet. So I'm going to add a guide right here. Well, now what I've done is I've given myself guides that I can use in order to draw a rectangle across. So I'm going to tap the R key on my keyboard. And by the way, you can tap the L key on your keyboard in order to lock that to a direction. But then I'm just going to mouse over this, single click, move my mouse again, and I'm going to click right here. Well, notice what that's done is that's split out this face. And by the way, if it doesn't split out the face, it probably means that you grouped your geometry, but then didn't double click into the group in order to edit the geometry. But now I'm just going to tap the delete key right here in order to delete out this face. And while I'm here, let's go ahead and let's add a couple window openings. So in this case, I'm going to use the tape measure tool. I'm going to say I want a window that's going to be 4 feet off of this wall. And the window is going to be 4 feet wide. And I'll draw another guide up by maybe 3 feet right here. Whoops. So we'll just single click, type in a value of 3 feet. And that's going to give me a guide that I can use for my window opening. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this edge and I'm actually going to move it over by another, we'll call it 2 feet right here because I want this window to be wider. Well, notice how if I take this edge and move it over along this red axis, these edges will also stretch in order to make this a little bit bigger. You don't have to do that. You could also just undo your box, use the tape measure tool right here, and we could just draw a guide right here. And then we're going to draw a rectangle across this face and delete this out. Now, I might also add some windows that are the same size. So I think this was 4 foot by 6 foot. So I might do the same thing on the side of my house. So I'm just going to draw a guide up. I'll draw this guide up to 7 feet. And we'll say this is going to be 5 feet over, 6 feet right here. We'll say there's another, and then we'll do the same thing on the back side. So I'm going to hit, whoops. I'm going to draw a guide off of this back side, 5 feet. And then another one 6 feet right here. And then we'll just draw a line up. And remember that I can hold the shift key in order to lock this to the blue axis. And I can just use this as an inference. Well, then all you have to do is just draw a rectangle across the face. And notice how I'm not inside of this group. So that didn't work. I need to double click into the group, tap the R key and single click right here. And that'll split out those faces and you can select them and delete them using the delete key. Well, now I'm done with all of these guides. And so what I want to do is I want to go to display. I want to click the option for delete all guides right here. Well, now what we want to do is we want to draw our doors and our windows. And so we're just going to do something very simple. So we're just going to tap the R key, tap the left arrow key, and we're going to draw a rectangle across each one of these faces. And actually, I'm not going to do that over here because I'm just going to reuse the window that I generate because they're the same size. But in this case, for my door, what I want to do is I want to select these 3 edges right here just by doing a click, shift click, shift click. And then I'm going to tap the F key on my keyboard to activate offset. I'm going to offset this in by 2 inches right here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete out this face for a moment just so you can see what I'm doing. Well, in this case, what I want to do is I want to push pull this door frame in by whatever the thickness of my wall might be. And in this case, our wall doesn't have thickness. So we're just going to say that our exterior wall is maybe 6.5 inches is fine. And I'm just going to come back in here, select all of this. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to make it a group. So now notice how my frame is separate from the rest of my model. So all that geometry is not merging together. Well, then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap the R key on my keyboard, draw another rectangle right here, and I'll push pull this by like 1 3/8 or whatever the thickness of a door is going to be. Something like that. Well, then remember, because I've been grouping all of my geometry, there's nothing else for it to pick up. So I can just do a triple click to select this whole thing. I can right click and I can make that a group. And then a lot of the time I like to put my doors and frames inside of a group just like this. So now I've got a door and a frame right here. If I move that off to the side, you can see what that door and frame looks like. Well, now we're going to do the same thing with our window, and we'll just use the offset tool and we'll just create a simple picture window. So we're going to say this is going to be maybe 2 inches right here. And I like to delete out the face and push pull my window back. And again, we're going to say this is 6.5 inches. And I'm just going to take this whole frame, right click and put it in a group. Then I'll draw a rectangle over here. And notice how I can just find the midpoint from this corner to the midpoint on this corner. And I'm just going to double click on that and make it a group as well. And then I'll do a shift click and put them both in a group. Well, notice that this is the same size as these openings. So rather than me coming in here and me remodeling this window right here, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to move the window off to the side. Now, one thing to note about this is instead of making this a group, you might right click on it and make it a component. When you make it a component, what you're doing is you're basically creating a smart object. So we're just going to call this window right here. Well, the difference between a group and a component is if I make copies of this component, those copies are going to be reflected across all of the instances inside of the model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Move tool in copy mode in order to create a copy. So I'm just going to tap the M key on my keyboard, click on this corner. Notice how right now this is moving this, but if I tap the Control key, it puts me in copy mode right here. Well, now I'm just going to tap Q in order to activate the Rotate tool, and I'm going to tap the Up arrow key in order to lock this to the up axis. And then I'll just single click on this corner, click again to set a base point, click here to set my final point. And I'm just going to do the same thing. So M key, tap Control, click on this corner right here, and now I've got a copy over here. And what I like about this is because I made these components, if I double click into this object, and I'm going to double click into this frame as well, I'm going to tap the P key, and I'm going to extrude this out a little bit. Notice how when I extrude this out, all of the instances of this component are extruding outward. So I'm going to extrude this outward by like 3/4 of an inch, just so my frame isn't quite so flush with my wall. We'll do the same thing here, where we'll just pull this frame out 3/4 of an inch, just like this. So now we're pretty much ready to start adding materials to our model. And remember, you can activate materials either by coming over here into the materials section of your tray or by tapping the B key on your keyboard. And so this is going to give us access to SketchUp's material libraries. So when this pops up, you can click on this option right here in order to see the materials that are built in. There are other materials that you can download from the 3D warehouse, but we're not going to worry too much about that for this video. Now, one thing I want you to know is because we grouped all of this stuff, this is going to act a little different. So if I click on roofing right here, what I want to do is I want to add shingles to my roof. But right now, if I do this, notice how it applies it to everything inside of this group of geometry, which is not what I want because you don't shingle the underside of your roof or the front fascia of your roof. So I'm going to undo this. And what I want to do instead is I want to double click into the roof. When I do that, now notice how I can click on the individual faces like this. Well, I just want to activate the tool using this shingle material right here, and I'm just going to single click on either side. And I actually think that I like this roofing shingles multi a little bit better, so we're going to use that. But now we want to do the same thing with our house. So for our house, we want this to have a brick material. So we're going to scroll up, we're going to go to brick, cladding and siding, and we'll just pick a brick material. And again, you can apply this to the outside of your group, but we're going to go ahead and apply it to the individual faces because I'm going to split this face out in a second. So I'm going to click in here, I'm going to pick the brick like this, and I'm just going to apply the brick material to each one of the faces like this. Now, one thing I don't like about this is very uniform, right? It's kind of boring. So what I want to do is I want to split out this face so that I have a brick wainscot and then siding up above. Now, you could come in here and just like draw across these faces in order to split them out, right? That's like a valid way of doing this. Notice how I can split out the different faces, and I would have to draw this all the way across and then like split this out and do a whole bunch of geometric editing in here, right? Well, one easy way to do this is just to let SketchUp's geometry work for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate down, and I'm going to select this face, and I'm actually going to double click so that I pick up the face and all the selected edges, and then I'm going to do a shift click right here to deselect the face because I don't want to create a face, but what I do want to do is I want to take this geometry and I want to use the Move tool in copy mode in order to copy it up. So notice what I did is I just took that entire base of this house right here and I copied it up. Well, when I do that, what that does is that splits out the geometry by creating a copy of this edge right here. And by the way, if for whatever reason this erases out the bottom, you can just heal it by drawing an edge across this. But notice how now I've got my upper geometry and my lower geometry separated. Well, that means I can come in here with this siding and apply a siding material up above my brick wainscot right here. So now I have a brick house with a wainscot like this. And we could get more complex with this, but you understand the concept here. Now what I want to do is I want to add materials to these objects. Well, in this case, for my door, I want to add a wood material. So I'm going to go down to wood, and we'll pick one of these cladding, maybe this wood veneer right here. And then we're going to pick a color. We'll pick kind of a gray color for our frame. And it doesn't matter if we apply the material to the outside of our frame group, because we want all of these faces to be selected or colored anyway. So we're just going to apply this to the outside of our group, and that means outside of our frame group. So we're double clicking in. Remember, we have a glass group and a frame right here, and I want to apply a glass material to the actual glass pane right here. So if I click on this, now I have a glass associated with it. Well, remember that because these are components, when we applied materials to one of them, we now have materials applied to all of them. So now we've got this house in here, and it's got materials applied to it. It's nicely grouped and nicely organized so that we can make changes. All right, so that should give you kind of an idea of how to get started creating a model like this in SketchUp. In future videos, we'll get into more advanced functions and walls with thickness and things like that. But for now, I just wanted to give you a good project to get started with. So leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions or if you got stuck on anything. I just love having that conversation with you guys. I will also link to that free keyboard shortcuts guide in the notes down below. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.